On this note, welcome to JB Boda Academy. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. On behalf of Mr. Khaitan Boda, our Group Vice Chairman, we are pleased to welcome our friends, not only from India, but also from United States, United Kingdom, Europe, Germany, Africa, Caribbean, UAE, South Asia, Singapore, Philippines. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who have wholeheartedly rendered their support to initiate and execute this event. We couldn't have done it without you. We have with us an esteemed speaker today who has been a stalwart in the insurance industry. It's a privilege to have him here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Praveen Gupta, for honoring our invitation. Following 4 decades of varied and first-hand experience in 4 markets, Praveen sir called it a day from the insurance industry. As a recognized thought leader, he pursues many interests. Praveen sir was founding MD and CEO at Raheja QBE General Insurance Company Limited. He successfully put together a business model around specialist lines driven by the broking channel. Praveen sir is an MA from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. He is a chartered insurer, a fellow both of Chartered Insurer Institute, UK, and Insurance Institute of India. Along with sir, I also welcome our moderator of the day, Jyoti Krishnan. Jyoti is Associate Partner based in Mumbai office of Khaitan Legal Associates. Her expertise in insurance claims and coverage extends to providing coverage advice to insurers, insured, as well as involvement in settlement of such claims out of court. Her experience includes drafting of policy wordings, particularly in M&A insurance, PI policy, and specific professionals, title, and cyber products. Please do note, you can raise all your questions using the chat facility. We will try to answer as much we can. Whatever questions we are not able to answer today, we will post them back on a social media platform. Over to you, Praveen sir, and thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you very much, J B Boda Academy. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm also very pleased about the numbers that have joined in and the spread in terms of geography, despite the virus that plagues us all across the length and breadth of this planet. And I also have with me Jyoti, who's got some wonderful experience in multiple aspects of legalese. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation with her. The flow, as I would put it, is not going to be just a classroom textbook approach to D&O. What we wish to do is raise a few issues, globalize the very fascinating aspects of D&O, where it has come from, where is it today, and where is it likely to go to next. And Jyoti is going to help me in her own wonderful ways in that exploration. So, many of us have been for many years hearing about the VUCA world. As you all know, this is an acronym which I thought, for the sake of some of you who may not have heard it, and pardon my repeating to all of those who know about it, it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that it addresses or talks about. Where in this world and when in these 4.5 billion years since its evolution and the arrival of the Homo sapien would have such a situation arisen? Certainly never ever before in our lifetime of the mankind. Now, basically, where is the D&O going to be playing in this kind of a space? Has a lot of fascinating aspects. Unfortunately, the D&O has been reduced to a commoditized solution. What we intend doing, the two of us, is to bring it back to its pristine position that it ought to play. We also want to, in some ways, bring out what I love calling the physics and chemistry of D&O. The physics is what has now become the side A, B, C. It didn't become like that overnight. Over several decades of evolution, both in the American market post the Depression era and the Great Recession, to today via the London market, it has gone through several changes, and we believe this is not the beginning. This is not the end of it. There is a chemistry which goes in very nicely between the various components of insurance, risk management, and other solutions. So we will highlight all those issues. But where did this virus come from, and why do we need to extend the boundaries of our discussion to those kind of frames? Another phrase that has been used very regularly is zoonotics. So basically, I would borrow a phrase from Tom Friedman, the famous journalist and columnist, who says, we pushed Mother Nature too far. And it was the father Greek doing that. And Mother Nature is now pushing back. So many people in the world called the virus or the COVID or the corona, whatever you call it, they called it a black swan. And I would say, that's, pardon my using the phrase silly, but more appropriate would be naive. So it was either naive analysts calling it black swan, or it was smart analysts convincing naive customers that it was a black swan. It's not a black swan. Even Nassim Taleb, who coined this phrase, says it's a white swan. So, I don't want to play with these metaphors, but we need to understand that where was the origin of this virus? Did we know about it? And what was the governance around? And did that governance fail? And if that governance failed, then how does a cover which has a fiduciary role like D&O come into play? So that's the connection. So there's another author which is now trending very nicely. I've had the pleasure of connecting and interviewing her. Her name is Michelle Booker. Michelle talks about the pandemic as a gray rhino. So we saw it coming. We did nothing. We looked the other side, hoping that it will go away, but it is now running over us. So these are the connotations that are now mainstreaming in the phraseology, not just of literature, management literature or otherwise, but it is now coming into the legalese, and anyone trying to push it as we didn't know or this was an unknown is wrong. So not only Mr. Bill Gates in 2015 stood up and gave a TED talk about this kind of a situation becoming possible, but there were many others lesser known. Even the CIA was aware of it. So what was it that kept us from not acting upon it? It's not that everyone didn't act upon it. Wimbledon, for instance, took a cover for their event with an extension of infectious diseases. Now, they had the foresight, and this saved the day. So how did they decide to do it? Because they saw that SARS had almost infected a large chunk of population in a limited geography. But what if something more expansive came about? Another very inspiring story is, and this is all risk management that boards need to pursue and exercise vigorously. University of Illinois, the Urbana-Champaign campus, they, like many other management schools and campuses across US and across some very iconic universities, get the biggest revenue from the Chinese students. And they had the sense that, our revenue stream, if we were to look at possibilities, if the Chinese students were to stop coming for whatever reasons, including pandemic, then how would that affect them? And they said we should have a risk management or risk transfer facility for this. So not only they aced the risk management part of it, they also did the right thing by transferring it and saved the day. So it's not that this was an unknown, but there were severe and several failures. We also know that this pandemic has two sides, or this is part of two sides of a coin. So one side is the virus, the other side is the environment or the climate change. So we cannot look at them in a disjointed way. And why? Because this will also have implications for a lot of issues that boards will face and directors and officers liability or management liability will have to address. I can go on and on, but at this point of time, I think I will provoke my fellow panelists to talk about something which generally comes at the tail end, and that is class actions. And there can't be a better trigger for anyone across the world, any country, whatever jurisdiction, to be not mindful of class action. So over to you, Jyoti. What are your thoughts on class actions?
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. What Mr. Gupta has brought to the attention to our attention rather, is a very important point. Class action as a concept is not new. We all have heard about them. We all have expected them in many ways. And Western countries are already seeing them on a very large scale. But somehow in the Indian context, we have not really seen class actions as such. We have inbuilt provisions in our constitution, in our legislations where we talk about an action on behalf of a class. But the concept of a class action is still new. Now, just going back a little in history, we had a number of public interest litigation for various subject matters across the spectrum of subjects, where one person or one group of individuals decided that they should approach court and seek relief for a larger group. That essentially is the fundamental of a class action. But when we talk about class action in terms of shareholders as a class, that's a very new concept for us. Because Companies Act, first of all, in 2013, when the new act came in, that's when they introduced it as a statutory concept. Now, having done so, the relevant limit of who can apply, how many number of members are needed to start a class action, so on and so forth, these elements were brought into notification only last year. Having said that, I also believe that today with COVID is a classic example of when class actions can be expected. COVID is not only impacting a single straight out society, it's impacting everybody. It's also impacting businesses, it's impacting individual lives, it's impacting larger corporates. It has an impact which is widespread than anything else that we have seen so far in our history. So having said that, class action becomes a very important element that we need to keep in mind. And why do we talk so much about class actions in a DNO forum, for example? Would be a typical directors and officers insurance policy also tends to a class action that the directors see. For example, we have a specific cover for it called as shareholders action. Now, if shareholders were to take the company to court on account of drop in share price, wrong disclosures, misrepresentation, then a DNO policy is supposed to come to the company's rescue. And that's why class action becomes so relevant in this conversation and this discussion on DNO policies. One very important point to remember in this scheme of thing is the US SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission, has in fact released a directive of a sort where they have encouraged companies to make their disclosures as accurate and as fact-based as possible. In fact, one of the lines in the press release specifically says that today is the day when disclosures have to be accurate and factual. What they in fact go on to also say is that they will expect companies to not rely on past actions or past examples. They will expect companies to come up with disclosures which are based on today. So for example, if we are making a projection of a future cash flow, it cannot be based on what I expected last year. It has to take into consideration the impact of COVID today, because what has happened in the last 2 months or 3 months in India was not there in December. It was not there. People weren't functioning from this spectrum. Today's spectrum is a very different position to be in. And from this standpoint, class action takes a very different importance in today's day and age. Another very important aspect from a class action standpoint that I think I want to touch on is the medicinal industry as such. Now today we are dealing with a disease, a virus, essentially a disease. We all are hoping that a vaccine would come about very soon. But the process of bringing a vaccine actually goes through a number of steps rather. And it's not it's not that anybody wants to make a mistake, but yes, it is possible that something happens and the vaccine doesn't do the job that it's supposed to, or a medicine comes about which is meant to cure the disease but comes with side effects which are not acceptable as per the medical standards. Now this again can lead to major class action in our country. And I'm only dealing with examples right now which are more relating to COVID and relating to our current scenario. But generally speaking, India would be a very good example to look at class actions, because one, we do have a number of classes, and two, just the sheer number of people who get involved in specific industry, specific activities will allow us to explore what is possible and what is not possible in terms of a class action. Now, I think I'm going to end my remark on this by just referring to the very famous Satyam case. In fact, before Satyam case, we had the Union Carbide issue back in 80s. We all remember it with a sort of a mourning face, a feeling that doesn't go away, especially for people who have lived through that crisis. They remember that it was a difficult time. People who suffered didn't really get much. And one of the reasons they didn't get compensated, they were not looked after by the so-called perpetrators. And one of the reasons was we didn't have a provision which allowed the sufferers or the class of sufferers to seek compensation from that company or the organization. Then came the Satyam case. History sort of repeated itself. Again, the shareholders were left high and dry in India, whereas we all are aware that in US, 13 class action suits were filed and multi-billion dollars were paid in terms of compensation and reinstatement value, etc., etc. I think suffice it to say that it's enough now, and this is the time we need to move on from our past experiences and use the law to make sure that if an action or an event happens that impacts a class, the class needs to be able to fight against the perpetrator. And that's when a DNO for the company will come very handy, because a security class action is covered under an Indian DNO policy. From a general standpoint, I think class actions are very important, but I'm just going to deviate a little bit. Sir made a very important point about we saw this coming. This is not a black swan. Now, in terms of the whole environmental consciousness and awareness that is connected to this virus, we all are aware that back in the 80s and 90s, we used to have a number of enviro-legal cases being filed. We used to have a number of orders being passed, which were all pro-environment, which were all passed keeping in mind that, and I'm going to quote from Justice Bhagwati's quote, that right to life includes right to healthy life. Back in the day, these were very common cases that we used to see, and a number of important jurisprudence was laid down through these cases. Moving to Mr. Gupta, sir, how do you see the coming century in terms of environment-related jurisprudence, and do we see how do you see it improving or evolving in that sense?
Very interesting, and so a very multifaceted question, but I'll make an attempt. So when I was growing, one of the most inspiring thing that we were seeing in the Himalayan region, particularly what is now known as Uttaranchal, a movement called Chipko movement, and there was rampant deforestation that was going on, and there was popular class, if we use it in today's phraseology, that developed, and people would go and literally cling to the trees when the cutters came to chop the trees off, and that really pushed back a lot of people, evil intended businesses and contractors from clearing the forest areas. But the point was that suddenly there was an awareness about environment. We've also had other similar issues in when you are building dams and you're flooding villages and creating other menace which create imbalances. But I can go on and on. So we've had a culture and a history. But the most recent one, which we've all seen, so is what happened right here in Mumbai at the RA. So RA is a very, it's an extension of a tropical rainforest, which is, if you look at its origins, it is part of a much larger forest area. Much of it has been chopped, but still a significant part of it is around. And to build a section of Bombay Metro, some trees had to be chopped. Some of them were as old as 200 years. And those trees can never be replaced by whatever you may do. And that created a whole lot of ruckus for good reasons, because all activists came out. And the faith in the judicial system was restored when finally, over a weekend, the activists appealed to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court brought a stay. Unfortunately, a lot of trees had been chopped by then. But what is the trigger for the jurisprudence that you are talking about, Jyoti, is what came out in terms of strong editorials. One of them in the Indian Express, if I can recall the exact language or part of the key message that came out, was it was pulling up the authorities for playing what they said was cat and mouse game with the general public. And it also appealed that they are an important stakeholder. So the moment you bring in that public into a stakeholding mindset or a phraseology, then your boardroom responsibility has extended far beyond the four walls of a boardroom. So everyone can be a stakeholder. So it's not the shareholder who's important anymore. What also is happening is, which many people still don't realize, and the world outside ought to also realize, is the significant millennial population this country has. And while the oldies dominate the political order, it's getting very close to a time when the entire power shift will happen to millennials, or people who are millennials now but will get a little older. And they don't think like the people like me. I mean, they are concerned about the environment, they're concerned about their rights and duties, and they would want to take action. So the governance is now not a single letter, it's ESG. So there is environment, there is societal, and there is governance. So you can't de-link governance from these two aspects. So it's already expanded the territory, the geographical territory, the intellectual and the philosophical, and thereby the action area for D&O also increases. Now, I must tell you, which perhaps not many people know, even in this country, is that, in response to this political shift that could happen with the power shift, a new political party has been formed. It is still below the radar. I'm a lucky one because I take a lot of interest in one of the young millennials, who's a very strong upcoming lawyer in Delhi. Thanks to him and his team of like-minded people, they've launched what they call a Green Justice Party. And this was launched on the Twitter, and I'm telling you, perhaps this is not the first and last. There'll be many more such replications, and they are going to challenge the current order. So once the legislative side of the executive gets activated, the lawmakers will write the laws, the jurisprudence will change. And many of them are lawyers. Not that only lawyers would write laws or would only be lawyers are activists, but it's a good sign for this country's future. But what does it bode for the D&O and the like of management liability? It definitely means more responsible governance, which is not an isolated behavior. It also includes environmental and societal aspects. So what are they talking about? They're talking about sustainability. So that will be another phrase that will get into our jurisprudence. Decarbonizing. So India is amongst the is the third largest polluter in the world. We emit, despite our significant poverty, we emit significant amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And something needs to be done about it. And people are watching that. And we don't need anyone outside India to tell us. There are enough vigilantes within the country who are well-intended and want this country to be, having seen the blue skies and the clean air, maybe many of them have seen it for the first time. they don't want to give up on it. And the last thing that I want to say is that a lot of technology that is evolving. I was very inspired looking at a company which is based in Bangalore, and again, a millennial who started it. And one of his partners, it's called Ambi. And Ambi is into data and technology application into the air quality management. And the story is that one of his partners had a baby child who every morning around 3 to 4 a.m. used to get into fits, respiratory kind of fits. And, they would take the kid to the pediatrician, and pediatrician would say, no, maybe it's some allergy, this, that. But then this guy thought something is abnormal. And he built a device which he would drive around his home. And ultimately, he zeroed into a factory which was 3 kilometers away, which would release noxious gases just when the pollution control board office was shut. So this would have been generally between 2 to 3:30 a.m. And that's when the baby would react. So he built in a device, and he built a business plan that we need to do something about the air quality, not just in Bangalore, not just around my home, but across the whole wide world, and then manage the data and figure out what is going wrong where. So today, unlike in the past when I was growing, when we had Chipko movements and many other Bhopal gas and many of these tragedies, you have technology, you have the will, and there will be a way. So the civic authorities and employers all will have to be mindful. You cannot pollute anyone's neighborhood. You cannot put your employees in polluting workplaces. There will be PLI implications, and this will also have an employer value proposition. So if I create a healthy environment, I believe I will get much superior employees because they don't want to compromise on quality of life. So all these are potential triggers, Jyoti. I hope I've answered what you had in mind.
Yes. In fact, I'm quite amazed with how little we think about when we talk about environment and how much more there is to think about. Absolutely. And we should be thinking about that.
Yes.
So, in terms of environment legal issues, I think we all know that any action against a company in that sphere is likely to also trigger a DNO action.
Yes, and also, I would rather provoke you to put your thoughts on how's the governance regime changing in India. If pardon my slipping on this just when I should have been doing it, but I think that will help us stay on the focus.
Sure. In fact, I was about to talk about governance. Okay. I think we are seeing a major change in how even the legislator or generally the government looks at governance. In the last few years, rather about 10 years, if we see, we are seeing that all the laws are being amended to make sure that the C-suites, as we call them, or the board or the management is being made responsible for the actions of the company.
Absolutely.
Companies always existed and the board always existed. Yeah. But it's the liability and the accountability element that has gone up heavily in the last decade or so. If we just go back to the statute, the Companies Act came about in 2013, and we had a concept of officer in default. We always knew that the officer who had hands into a particular event will be held responsible. But this time, the legislature decided to define the term, to set accountability right in the beginning so that there is no confusion about it.
Absolutely.
Another very good example here would be defining the duties of a director. We knew directors were there. We knew they had a fiduciary duty. But now we have an entire section dedicated to what are the duties of a director, which means tomorrow there is no question of a director saying, I didn't know I had to do it. Yeah. You have to do it. You are a director. You will deal with it and you got to do it. Yes. Similarly, SEBI, RBI and CCI, all the regulators are now tightening their control on how the board or the management is supposed to deal with the company and be responsible for the actions and consequences of the company's actions. One very interesting example here also would be the MHA order that has come due to the COVID lockdown, where they talk about organizations should not reduce the pay of the employees and should not terminate employees.
Yes.
Now, even in the scheme of just the sheer MHA order, if we see organizations terminating employees in violation of that order, it is not only that the organization will have to deal with the penalty or the consequences, even the directors will be held to task.
Yeah.
We can expect the government to implement this to the teeth in such a manner that whether be it criminal penalty, whether be it civil fine, the directors will also be answerable equally, if not more. The other aspect here, which is very important also to sort of think about in this case, is from a governance standpoint. We know that we have SEBI for listed securities. We have the RBI on the financial side. We have CCI and IRD on the insurance side, and so on and so forth. There are several regulators. All are working towards increasing the responsibility of the directors and the officers in the functioning of their respective companies. And that is how I see that the governance has led to the increased demand of DNO policy. We had DNO policy for a long time, but I believe that the requirement of a DNO policy has become more and more sort of a precondition now more than ever. And a few practical examples of where we in our daily life see that a DNO policy is something that people have started expecting. For example, when we have foreign investments coming in, one of the conditions precedent to closing is to make sure that there is a DNO policy in place. We in fact have investors telling us very clearly that if my nominee does not have a DNO, I don't come on the board and I do not want to invest. So it's as good as like the entry ticket for an investment. And today, in the era of globalization that we live in, and India being heavily dependent on foreign investments, etc., this is not something we can anymore afford to ignore. So I think I want to basically insist, or rather I want everyone to think about where the governance is going. It's not just about holding someone accountable. It is also about putting accountability such that everybody gears up to the task. It's no longer a situation where I can think of, I did my bit and I'm good, sort of a behavior. I need to consciously make sure that one, I don't err, but also I don't omit. So it's both error as well as omission that needs to be taken care of. And that's all the DNO is all about. So yes, I mean, a short answer to the concept is yes. I can totally see the governance, the behavior of governance in India being completely inclined towards increase of DNO policies and the DNO risk as such. So I think where I would request you to sort of provide inputs is in terms of your global experience. You've traveled worldwide, you've worked with multinational organizations. How do you see the global parameters influencing governance?
Yeah, that's very fascinating again, and that's going to be impacting us in a big way. Let's start with the US presidential elections. We saw what the Democrats were positioning themselves on, and they were talking about the Green New Deal. Now that, Mr. Trump is not going to be around forever, so everyone's hoping that he doesn't last beyond his first term. I have no political biases, but I think definitely he's not good for the world environment. And in that sense, everyone's looking to hasten his exit. The Green New Deal, if the Democrats come in, would mean a real quantum leap into the green ways. Particularly, America has been a major laggard because they've been very supportive of the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry emits the most amount of carbon dioxide in the air, and America, for all this time till China took over, was the biggest polluter in the world. So almost 40 to 45% of all the carbon dioxide that sits in our atmosphere is a contribution of that great country. Green Deal is also a major discussion in Europe. All the bailouts that are happening, they are generally linking it to how would this lead to a better environment. So it's good. And like GDPR, which we've been discussing for last 2-3 years, has a serious implications for many issues, including cyber risk, but also directors, officers in very many ways. There is another regulation which has come up, which is the SMCR. This is called the Senior Managers Certification Regime. Now, each and every designated manager, officer, director who's responsible for disclosures, which you were talking about, would be personally accountable and could be charged for any breach. Now, that is very significant. So imagine an Indian company, whether a joint venture or just a trading partner dealing with Europe. If you don't comply, you will be a pariah country or pariah economy. So these are very, very stringent things that are happening. Fund managers are now moving towards ESG. A lot of people wonder what is the connection between D&O and ESG. But as I said, it's the governance, and governance in an expanded format is ESG. We don't know what it will be tomorrow because there are many other things that are impacting and getting into it. So there are, there is something called principles of responsible investment. Now that is not mandatory. So is principles of sustainable insurance. That is also still not mandatory. But as we go along, as Green Deal happens, as Green New Deal happens, there will be significant push, and these will be monitored by global regulators, and we would also have to evolve and adapt our regulations to make sure that these standards are complied with. Last but not the least, I also want to quote, which you already touched upon, but to make it very specific. And this is, the financial regulators and courts are increasingly recognizing that directors have a fiduciary duty to assess, manage, and report to shareholders on all key risks. And all key risks mean environment, societal, and everything. And COVID is very much part of it. Now, the last point I want to make, and which is another very inspiring thing, is how food habits are changing. So about a year and a half ago, America saw a launch of a wonderful concept in business, in food, as a company called Beyond Meat, and which is doing phenomenally well. Despite all other businesses tanking, Beyond Meat share rides high. Why? Because more and more people are turning vegan. People realize that destroying nature and the way we feed on meat in traditional way is not great. It causes zoonotic diseases, pandemic being one of them. That reinforces with what David Attenborough, everyone knows who he is, says that 90% of mammals population on this planet is today humans and livestock. And 70% of birds is poultry. So imagine what have we made out of it. And poultry and livestock are highly carbonizing industry, and they also cause disease, and they also cause a lot of grief to the millennial generation, which is now thriving and is going to push. So these are very many forces which are driving change, and this will suddenly rise far faster than what they would have had the pandemic not broke. Those are my thoughts, Jyoti.
Yes, sir. In fact, what you mentioned just got me thinking about something that we used to discuss a lot back about accountability, responsibility of organizations. And a very famous case that evolved in India, at least, was the oleum gas leak case, which was not right after, but basically after Union Carbide. But what happened back then is that in India, so we always thought or always knew of the concept of strict liability. Now the word strict, although makes me believe that it's stricter for the company, but what it turned to do is that it gave exceptions like negligence or knowledge and consent, etc. What our courts went to do is to rely on Ryland versus Fletcher, which is a strict liability judgment, and turned it into an absolute liability position from an Indian standpoint. Mm-hmm. And I think three very important points from that case and just the jurisprudence around it that I wanted to bring forth before sort of moving on was one, I think what got acknowledged in that case is that India doesn't have to follow anybody when it comes to law or jurisprudence. And that will equally apply to D&O. Yeah. That will equally apply to liability insurance or any other form of sort of insurance for that matter. The second point that court made very clear is responsibility is directly proportional to your pocket, which means if you have the measure and the means to take care of something and you decided not to do it, then sorry, but you got to be made responsible because you have the deeper pocket. You had the means to avoid it, but you chose not to. Yeah. And last but not the least, I think what the court made very clear is that human life and people is what needs to be preserved. Absolutely. And if we cannot preserve life, then there is a serious problem in the whole mindset that we are running with. So I believe such cases and such instances in our country has basically given a push to the D&O policies, and how they get driven, the pricing, the modeling, etc. In fact, one thing that I definitely wanted to request you to comment on is, how do we see, now we know that COVID as an event is likely to give rise to more and more D&O claims, rise in demand for D&O policies. But how do we see the pricing model, pricing or the modeling of a D&O policy, designing, etc., getting impacted on this account?
So, yeah, that's a stiff challenge you've thrown at me. Let me make an attempt. So essentially, let's look at the arrival of D&O into India. And so it was a direct transplant. Companies like AIG played a significant role even before the opening up of the market. They were collaborating with the Indian partnering companies and making the product available, and people being made aware of the virtues of why there should be a directors and officers cover. But essentially, there's a historical perspective that, not everything came in as A, B, C. That is what is most amazing. So the A side came in and the B side came in, and then they realized that the entity was being left out. So the C side came in, and a lot of people say that informally the EPLI side is the D side, although it's not how it is defined, but there is a constant evolution. But much of what is happening has already happened, and we've been generously borrowing that. What needs to happen also is our behavior in introducing this solution. So unfortunately, what has happened, when we got the product first time, we charged a very good price. The number of triggers were not as many. Things like class action didn't exist till the Companies Act 2013 came. So we were merely charging a price which accounted for all these potential triggers, because the pricing models were from outside India, from wherever the home country of any private company joint venture was. And then when the Companies Act happened, 2013, we started seeing crashing of price, and the product was commoditized. So I'm appalled by how we have been inversely proportional, if I may say, in our behavior of matching the solution and charging the right price. So all these are things that need to be kept in mind. But to evolve, an Indian version of it, it's not that Indian Companies Act is a product of post, independence or something. There are two things which are very phenomenal and which are missed out, which I want to quickly highlight. One is the East India Company. The East India Company was, we all know about the history, it's been almost 400 years plus that it formed and started operating in India. But what really transpired was the serious governance failure, whether it was aided and abetted by people in the government back in England. But there was a lot of crony capitalism, and there's a lot of case history there. If anyone has interest in that sense of history and wants to relate it to the evolution of liabilities at the board level and corporate governance and fiduciary, East India Company is a classic case study. I don't want to get into that too much, but there's another thing that happened in India for the first time, and it was the invention of something that the rest of the world didn't know, and that was the managing agencies. And I would love to recommend this book to all of you. It's called Goras and Desis, and it is written by an eminent economist, Omkar Goswami. So please try and flip through it. It's not a fat book, and it's very light prose. You'll enjoy it. And again, the managing agencies were not a creation of the English. The first managing agency that was formed was by Dwarkanath Tagore, who was a grandfather of Rabindranath Tagore, and he was an astute businessman, and he saw many opportunities in having a managing agency, and Car Tagore company was the first managing agency. So there's a whole lot of things that sit within our psyche, within our corporate evolution and making of corporate India. So if you were to follow that evolution, you will understand contextually and be able to predict and price whatever solution you want D&O to be, which caters and responds to Indian needs as well. But let us remember that D&O remains a fairly global solution. There is nothing only Indian or only American. We need to be mindful of specifics, and all I'm doing is to sensitizing you about an aspect of Indian corporate evolution that has been forgotten. So I hope, Jyoti, that gives you some kind of insight into how I think about it. Yeah, so basically the new normal, Jyoti, that we need to be mindful of. And new normal is going to be triggering, someone messaged me just an hour before that the new normal is orange is the new normal. So that's how life will be. It will never be green. It may not be red. So what kind of situations will it trigger, and how will it really impact us? What kind of triggers will it provide for management liability and assorted covers, which eventually, the D&O sits at the top of?
Right, sir. In fact, nowadays we hear this term a lot, new normal. In fact, when I'm conversing with my colleagues, we actually have stopped calling it new normal. We say it's normal, and we used to have an old normal. So it's no longer new for us, because we've been in lockdown for more than a month now, and things are not looking to go back to pre-23rd March anytime soon. So coming to what is new normal from a perspective that I see it, new normal is Zoom call. New normal is to be able to interact with people for the first time over internet calls. New normative travel, saving travel time. Another aspect from a just purely litigation standpoint, online court is new normal. There was a time where the concept of, oh God, I have to go to court, I have to balance traffic, I have to think ahead, etc., existed. And today, 5 minutes before the hearing, I can be ready and prepared to sort of argue a matter. So within the last 1.5 months, I have seen my own understanding of normal change drastically. Now, in light of all of this, how do we see, we talk about D&O, but we can definitely see a huge interface between several liability policies here. So for instance, D&O, yes, we've discussed the possibilities, regulatory actions, class action, employment claims, so on and so forth. But now, one of the common sort of concepts that we keep discussing during COVID is businesses are shutting down. They're not able to supply products. They're not able to keep up their contractual obligations. This will give rise to professional indemnity liability claims. Yeah. All the PI policies will be standing up for trigger. We have a work from home regime today. We all are working from home. Many of us are using our office devices, but our home unsecured networks. Yes. The facility itself, so it's open for attack. I'm not saying that everybody will be attacked. Fairly above average hacker, it will not be a difficult job at all. In fact, my personal experience is we had a seminar on cyber insurance, and an ethical hacker was invited. He took one of our colleagues' phone and hacked it in 33 seconds. This is how unsecure our systems generally are. Now, in view of that, we can definitely see a booming rise in cyber claims, or rather the need for cyber insurance by claims. In fact, I was reading an article that as compared to other liability policies, there aren't many cyber policies being placed yet. We can expect that to increase with the whole new normal concept, the virtual meetings, everything is virtual today. Now we have trades and businesses who are not able to meet their liabilities. somebody sitting in US, he's not able to supply goods because of the whole border closing issue. Somebody is sitting in another country, they've gone insolvent, they're not able to pay. Trade credit insurance comes into play. So people will be willing to buy that insurance. In fact, we very recently saw a situation where one of our clients got 85% of the contract value through the insurance after removing deductibles and everything. And he moved on. And now he's fighting the litigation, which is fine. But I mean, from a pure litigant standpoint, if I have the comfort that my insurer gave me 85% of the value I was supposed to get from the buyer, I will be more than willing to litigate and put my resources, because today I already know the success. Whereas normally what happens in India is I am fighting while I am waiting for other things to happen. So I think that's a huge shift from where we usually operated versus now where we can look to operate from. And I think that sort of gives me a positive hope. In fact, sir, it'll be great to know your views on how do you perceive the new normal and the impact on general insurance as a sector and liability policies.
Yeah, so I'm just mindful that we could be a little squeezing the Q&A part, but very quickly, I'll want to wind it up. As I said, there are three things which I see most affected. One is the tech side of it. So you covered it, the cyber, etc. Two is the employee side of it. So the EPL part would be the most vulnerable unknown as of now, because we don't know what's going to happen. So you're kind of encroaching the privacy of your employees. I talk to many people, young and old, and many of them say now, we are working 7 days a week.
Yes.
So we get calls from our boss, or boss says we have a hookup, and so we need to leave everything aside. I'm also aware of a family, a husband and wife, both are TV journalists, and they operate studios from 2 rooms of their 4-room house. So the rest one, I mean, the kids and the parents and everyone's restless and uneasy. And, these are very uncomfortable situations. So you will have all these challenges. On top of that, you'll have several HR issues, privacy and harassment and all kinds of things, and performance appraisal. How do you, I may say that I work 7 days a week, so what if you couldn't do your targets? I did whatever I could do. I normally don't work so much, but I'm working more than that, and yet you rated me 80%. So, these are going to be phenomenal, challenges running at the managing of company, not just left to the management, but it will eventually be fiduciary headaches, and the D&O will have to come into play. So basically, again, reputation. The trial today happens not in courts, but by the social media. So imagine if employees start posting all kinds of things. We've seen, supply chain issues in Amazon and employees protesting that, we are not maintaining social distance in the warehouses, and some of the very senior people have been sacked, and there is activism. So a whole lot of these things are in play, and we need to be mindful of all this. And this will eventually play in a very complex web of all these liability covers, even property, because business interruption decisions, if they are not taken properly and the company loses money, balance sheet is impacted. The board is responsible. So we need to examine this entire web very closely. This is part of risk management eventually, which then goes to the apex, and at the apex is the D&O. So I think we can go on and on, but I think let's see what our audience has to ask in particular.
I request Chaitanya to sort of, I think we have a number of questions. Chaitanya, would you kindly tell us what questions are being raised?
Sure, definitely. In fact, good that Praveen sir brought up this aspect that, we have a hard stop at 6 p.m. But just to mention that, our speakers today have completely enthralled the audience and cast a spell. I mean, we've not used a single slide, believe you me. So we've been completely interactive. Yeah. As far as the questions are concerned, given the current context, of the global pandemic, COVID-19, what are the claims that we expect as far as D&O and the other liability covers are concerned, primarily for D&O?
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chaitanya. I think just to keep the answer short here, right? We can expect DNO, of course, we talked about how it will get covered, but within DNO also, any regulatory breach will be will get engulfed. You can have class actions, you can have EPLI claims, and EPLI is not just about existing employees. There are coverages for applicants too. So all this deferment of starting date can lead to these claims. And last but not the least, I can see almost all liability insurances seeing claims across, but yes, DNO, PI, cyber, EPLI, business interruption, these are some of the claims that we definitely foresee. Within DNO,
sorry, crime, and you mentioned about vaccines and all, even clinical trials.
Clinical trials, yes.
Because there could be pharma companies or companies undertaking trials and misselling. So a whole lot of suite of covers will be interplaying with DNO.
Yeah, Chaitanya,
Ajay had an interesting question. Yeah, what he's mentioned is even though the MCA has allowed AGMs to be deferred, companies may still not be able to conduct the AGMs. So will the fines and penalties then imposed by the ROC, will they be subject to a DNO claim?
So I think what we need to understand is if there is a deferment by MCA, then till the date it is deferred to, then till that date,
Jyoti,
there's no non-compliance. And I think I want to point out to the person who asked this question, the MCA is now allowing virtual AGMs also. Yeah. So it's going to be difficult to say that I couldn't hold my AGM because I couldn't meet my shareholders.
Absolutely.
That needs to be kept in mind. And last but not the least, we all know if there is a misconduct or an intentional breach, usually most DNOs will have an exclusion. So that needs to be kept in mind. A negligent breach versus a intentional dishonest breach.
One question from Mr. KV Prasad is there a possibility of ambulance chasers in DNO claims? The country also needs to protect well-meaning industries as well as industrialists.
So my response is yes, there is a chance. We are seeing ambulance chasers and class actions as well. America, Australia in particular. So, definitely that will have to be kept under check. So, Jyoti, any thoughts on that in particular?
I think I completely agree with Praveen sir on this. Whenever there's an opportunity, you can expect the same behavior being exhibited in India. We are no different.
Yeah, it can be a big money making racket. Yes. So, easy money and greed.
I guess thank you so much. I guess we picked up the major and important questions. And I think the other questions which are there from the participants, we will actually attend to them offline and definitely take it. Anything else which comes to your mind? Because we touched upon ESG as far as DNO is concerned. Would you like to touch upon that? Because that seemed very relevant given today's situation.
So you want me to comment on ESG?
Yes, please.
Okay, so all I'm saying is, what is DNO about? DNO is about, let's look at the various moving parts. You have the risk management and the entire risk spectrum. So you have identification, assessment, or whatever, and eventually, mitigation and risk transfer. Now, that is part of a risk function. In a board, you have risk committees and serious people, knowledgeable guys sit there. They need to be mindful that they are assessing the risks properly. A Wimbledon or a Illinois University did something exceptional. Many other businesses failed. Now, the governance thing is nothing but packaging of risk and all this responsibility that the board owns, including the fiduciary responsibilities. So basically, the governance has been widened, and that includes environment and that includes societal aspects. And the societal now includes employees, and the environment can mean anything, everything. So what is happening is, as I said, the boardrooms reach and the stakeholder reach to boardroom has expanded universally, and anyone can get sued anytime if the risk play is not proper or correct. So ESG is the buzzword, and it will not be standalone G, it will have to be E plus S plus G.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And thank you, Jyoti. I would want to hand it over to Aruna, please, to take it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chaitanya. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you so much. On this note, I would like to call Gautam, sir, to convey the vote of thanks. Give me a minute.
Sure.
Thank you, Aruna.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of J B Boda Group and the audience, I'm totally humbled with the presence of Mr. Praveen Gupta, Speaker of the Day, for all the valuable information he has shared with us today on D&O, which was well supported by Jyoti Krishnan. I would also like to convey my sincere thanks to Saket Khaitan for all his valuable support. When planning an event such as this, it is imperative to gain the participation of experts in the field. We are fortunate to have you with us, sir. Your willingness to share your time and expertise in the area of D&O was critical to the success of this event. To our audience, we are gracious to see our webinar series being appreciated by you all. This motivates us to organize more interactive events. Please stay tuned for future events on liability. We will in due course announce the program details and request you all to participate. Once again, on behalf of J B Boda Group, I would like to thank you one and all for joining us, and continue to stay safe. Thank you. Over to you, Aruna.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Praveen sir and Jyoti, I want to have a closing comments. Jyoti, first you, and then sir, that you do the final closing comments.
Okay. In the spirit of keeping it short and hopefully sweet, I think D&O is the need of the hour. It's the subject of the hour, and also something to be looked into very carefully. So essentially, I have three advice, recommendation, or request, depending on how you want to take it. One, please assess your risk and take risk mitigation measures, including policies, liability policies, and otherwise, including D&O. Two, engage experts if there is any confusion. I understand that sometimes it can be expensive, but it's always better in the long run, because you need to be advised appropriately by people who are appropriately qualified. And three is take measures to mitigate a risk, because as someone very smartly said, prevention is always better than cure. So that's about it from me.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, you've said much of what I wanted to say, but I'll only add that, you know, when you look at D&O, since the focus was D&O, and since in the foreground is the big virus, which is invisible and incorrigible, we should examine the D&O in context of all other forms of risk transfer and as a part and parcel of overall risk management. So please remember, D&O sits in a very classic hierarchy at the top of it all. We have in the near past turned it into a commoditized product, you know, charging ridiculous price. I would really want all the buyers and all my other friends to make sure that you ensure that the D&O, you know, if all other businesses can fail, even insurers can fail. So please be mindful of the securities and balance sheet of the companies that stand behind what you believe is a risk transfer for your fiduciary responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again for all the audience, and see you next time. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.